King Rehoboam was the fourth king of Israel. He became king in 931 BC. He was not a good king. Why wasn't he a good king? Well, Saul, the first king of Israel, was a bad king because he would not trust the Lord. King Rehoboam was not a good king because he did not realize that God had made him king to serve God and serve God's people. He arrogantly and selfishly thought the people were there to serve him. You remember from last week how Rehoboam's father, King Solomon, wanted to be a good king. He wanted to serve God's people well. That is why when God asked Solomon what he wanted, Solomon asked for wisdom to govern God's people well. It pleased God that Solomon was not arrogant or selfish, but wanted to serve God and God's people. When Solomon was old, he kind of forgot why he was king. Many people came over the years of Solomon's reign from all over the world because they had heard of Solomon's great wisdom. They came and were impressed and praised him for his wisdom and the wonderful things that he had built. Solomon let this go to his head. He began to build even more things, but not to serve God or God's people, but to serve himself. Monuments and buildings so that others would see how great he was. This apparently rubbed off on his son Rehoboam, who thought it was right that the people serve him. This led to something terrible, as arrogance and selfishness so often do. When Solomon died, Rehoboam, his son, went to a town called Shechem to be made king of Israel. The people of Israel said to him, "Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the burdensome service of your father and his heavy yoke, which he put on us, and we will serve you." They were saying that all the taxes and labor required to build all of his father's building projects had been very hard for them. If Rehoboam was kinder to them and made things not so hard for them, they would serve him as their king. Rehoboam said that he needed time to think, so they should come back to him in 3 days. While they were gone, Rehoboam asked for advice from his father's counselors. They told him that if he did what the people asked and was kind to them, then the people would serve him as king. But Rehoboam also asked the advice of his friends. They worried that he would seem weak if he gave in to the people, so they told him to be tough with the people. King Rehoboam did not seek the advice of the Lord and took the advice of his friends. When the people came to him, he told them, "My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father chastened you with whips, but I will chasten you with scourges." He was saying he would be even tougher with them. He would be cruel. He would not be a king who would seek their good. You know what happened then? Most of the people of Israel rebelled. They said, "We won't serve you. You are not our king." And they made someone else king. They made a man named Jeroboam their king. I know, that is confusing. Jeroboam sounds like Rehoboam. But remember, the northern area rebelled against Rehoboam and made Jeroboam their king. J comes before R in the alphabet. The southern part of Israel stayed loyal to the line of David and kept Rehoboam as their king. So now you have two Israels. Northern Israel ruled by Jeroboam, and southern Israel, which is also called Judah, ruled by Rehoboam. They were no longer one country because of the sins of Solomon and Rehoboam, who forgot that they had been made king of Israel to serve God and serve God's people. They had not been made king for God and God's people to serve them. It was a dark day in the history of the kings of Israel, but there was still some good news. God had promised David and the world a son who would be a greater king than Rehoboam, which wasn't very hard. But God had also promised a king who would be better than David, which was very hard. But the king God promised David and us would be much greater even than David. This king God promised us would not look like a king. He wouldn't be born in a palace, but in a manger. He wouldn't wear a crown of gold, but of thorns. He wouldn't have a throne of ivory, but of wood. And he would be the greatest and best king of Israel. He would truly and always serve his people. He would be a king, and he would also be God. He would come not to be served, but to serve. and give his life a ransom for us all. This king is Jesus. That brings us to our memory passage for this week, which is from Matthew 20:28. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Jesus is talking here. He calls himself the Son of Man because he became man to do this for us. So say this passage with me now. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. One more time, and then you can go see if your parents know this passage. Matthew 20:28. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Our catechism for this week is the fourth commandment. Honor your father and mother, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. What does this mean? We should fear and love God, that we do not despise nor anger our parents or those in authority, but honor, serve, and obey them, and give them love and respect. We saw in our account today of the kings of Israel how Rehoboam did not honor the wiser and older counselors who his father had trusted. He listened to his young friends who had no experience and who weren't wise, and that led to great trouble. So say it again with me. Honor your father and mother, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. What does this mean? We should fear and love God, that we do not despise nor anger our parents or those in authority, but honor, serve, and obey them, and give them love and respect. You can find the worksheet at the link below. You'll have to type it into your browser.